First off, I'd like to start by thanking all of our panelists for being willing to come and speak to us tonight, and then also for bearing with us through these technical problems. We have Katie Stewart, the Executive Director of Pride Community Center, Sam Vargas, a volunteer with the PCC, and then we have Jessie Miller and Myra Yoch from Transcend. Panelists, if you could please introduce yourselves, and then we can get going with some of those questions.
Sure, I'll go first because no one else spoke up first. Hi, I'm Myra Lush, Transcend's Vice President. Jesse, do you want to say who Transcend is?
Yeah, so I'm the president of Transcend. My name is Jessie Miller, and I use he, they pronouns. Transcend is the trans and non-binary oriented organization on campus, and we provide transitioning and trans education resources to both students and people in the Bryan College Station area. And then we also provide like a community and social events for trans and non-binary people as well. Sam, would you like to go?
Hi, my name is Sam. I use he and pronouns. I'm a community member. I graduated from A&M in 2018, whoop, with a degree in communication. I was also the vice president of Transcend while I was there. And now I'm just kind of in town and around. Would you like to go next, Katie?
I guess so. So, hi. You can't see my hand there. I am Katrina Stewart, Pride Community Center Executive Director. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And glad to be part of this discussion and panel.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. I guess I wanted to start with asking, what are some of your initial thoughts from the documentary? I know we only got to see about a half an hour of it, but were there any things that resonated with you?
It's like real minor, but I just remember at one point they were talking to these two people, and just I could see that really familiar smile, just like where like a weight gets lifted off of your heart because oh fuck, pardon my French, I finally can start making progress on this like transition. I don't have to keep living the way I have been. And it was just really, I don't know, good, weird, wonderful to see on a movie that I know is, according to the website I looked up, it's shown around festivals at least. That's all I got, though.
I agree in that when the person with the really, really curly hair was talking and being so excited about finally being there and having the opportunity, and expressed that she was like going to cry. Like she felt like she could cry from being so like excited from being there. I felt that way too when I had surgery, and just being there was so overwhelming. Like it was such a weird and wonderful experience to physically be there, but also kind of an out of body experience because I was struggling and like thinking about all of the things that led up to being there, that I almost feel like I missed part of the actually being there, if that makes sense. But it was really cool to see that that was not just a unique experience, and that is something that's kind of shared by other people.
I'm glad that they had the person that had used silicone on, because that is not too far back in our own history. I mean, there were cases of it in Houston, probably less than a decade ago. I mean, it has not gone away entirely. And to not only see the realities of that, but to see Dr. Ting try to help her through that and fix it was great. Her story also touched me because she's basically one of our elders. She's been around. She knew Marsha Johnson. And I think we often, in knowing those names like Marsha and all those big names, right, we forget the other people that are involved, the people that are our neighbors and in our community. And it's really cool when you get to meet someone like that and you hear the wealth of their history and what they've been through and done.
I think to add to that, I was really touched by Dr. Ting's words about like why he started to do trans surgeries and like why he was motivated to do trans surgeries, and specifically about not only the importance of the surgeries to the trans patients that were looking to get those surgeries as part of their transition, but also because there are so few trans surgeons and trans doctors out there, and like there are so few resources for trans people, and I think that it's super important to realize not only like how important these surgeries are to these patients, but also like how hard and how far the patients have worked to get there. Like for example, the woman that had waited 40 years to get her surgery. Yes, precisely, in the chat, no one else would do it. I think it's a testament to not only the importance of Dr. Ting's work, but also to just the absolute courage and the absolute fight in trans people to be able to get those transition resources and be able to appear and be the people that they want to be to the level they want to be. And I think that's just like, it's just very moving. It's very powerful.
I think
Yeah, go ahead.
I just building on that, I think so there are very few, there are only a limited number of surgeons. I totally agree. But the other thing is we have no quality controls, right? Each surgeon has their own technique, and what you get from one surgeon may be totally different from what you get from another surgeon. And then the aftercare is another consideration. You know, if you look historically at surgeries, there's always this claim of, well, so many people regretted the surgery. Well, yeah, if you have no support after surgery, you're gonna regret the surgery. It's tough stuff to deal with. And so, yeah, you've had this great weight lifted, but that's just the beginning of the journey.
Frankie, did you have something to add?
Well, I was just thinking about, you know, we're talking about like lack of doctors and other stuff, and I think Katie brings up quality control, but there's also, you know, the time and money that goes into transitioning. Transitioning is very expensive in the United States, and so it's, and I think the documentary was touching on that a little bit, when Dr. Ting was talking about how he only sees a very small percentage of the population, like a very small percentage of the population, even have the ability and resources to be able to go after something like that.
The resources are a very good point, and that's why I keep posting this Jim Collins Foundation, because Jim Collins is one of the few, maybe of less than a handful, of organizations that are actively trying to help fund transgender surgeries. And so many people can't afford it, and this is not guaranteeing. I mean, this is an application process, it's a grant process, but it is a way to try to make headway in a world that is often keeping this sort of thing out of reach for people that need it.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like you said it perfectly. I think, and I know Allison added in the chat that a lot of trans surgeries are considered cosmetic, which is why they aren't covered by insurance policies and why they are so expensive, because they're considered like something that is not necessary, specifically like a medical process. And I think that also speaks to just how little trans research and trans medicine there is, specifically because of a lack of trans education, especially within America, and within other countries as well. I think that just the lack of not only trans resources, but people like educated and willing to give those resources is part of the problem why so many people struggle with the cost, because again, there are like so few people and so few doctors willing to give those surgeries that they have to bump up their prices, and they have to follow along with the pharmaceutical industry that causes them to have to charge the way that they do. And one of the other things that I found very, very interesting was that at Dr. Ting's clinic, a lot of the nurses and the receptionists were also trans. So it was like the trans doctor attracted also other trans people who worked in the medical field. And I thought that was very interesting because, again, like, there are so few trans doctors that, like, a lot of trans people like wanted to support those doctors and wanted to be part of that process, like helping people get those transitions. And I thought like that was very empowering because, again, like, it gave trans people in the medical field like an outlet to be able to help other trans people. But it was also a little saddening because it's like trans people who want to get those transitions and who want to get those surgeries oftentimes can only get those surgeries and those medical transitions from other trans people. Like, there is so little support from the cisgender community and cisgender doctors within the medical field that we truly have to like stay within our own community in order to get the resources that we need.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Frankie. That's the second time I've stepped on you. I would have loved to have had a trans nurse with the doctor I saw. I had a cisgender surgeon and cisgender nurses, and that's fine. His technique was fine. They did the best they can, but having gone through it, having lived that experience is so very different and so much more helpful to a client.
Thank you all. So we actually have an audience question, which I'm super excited to get y'all's feedback on. How can we help as a community during the transition and post-surgery? Do you have tips, tricks, driving folks to the doctor? Like, what would you recommend?
Myra, we cannot hear you, and your smile says that you're saying something very funny.
No, I was just saying that driving people to and from surgeons is like helpful, but which I guess speaks to the most basic thing that we can do is just, help in the ways that you would help someone who just had like lung replacement surgery, which is a thing that I'm pretty sure happens.
Mhm.
I don't know. Give them food, drive them places. I don't know very much about medicine. I'm very sorry I started talking.
You're doing fine.
Oh yeah, that was really good.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go first.
When I had surgery, I had a friend of mine who is cis surprise me at the like Airbnb that we rented, and that was a complete shock to me. And she was a really, really great friend and like a coworker and stuff that we'd worked together. And she drove like 5.5 hours to come like see and surprise me and to just help take some of that initial weight off of like my wife, who was helping me in the immediate post-op, and kind of, just being a second, set of hands and like a second like brain to think about, oh, so we have enough food for the next like few days that we're here, and like is there anything else we need from the store in this last like run, or is there anything that like I can grab while you stay here with him while he's like sleeping to make sure that he's okay, things like that. And that, not just the physical time that it took to like drive out and things like that, but just the emotional like time that she gave to support and to be there in her emotions and in her like thoughts of I'm helping to care and support this person was a huge thing for me, and really, really made the experience a lot more comfortable. Being in a new city that I didn't really know, and being there for only a week or a few days and then coming back, that really made all the difference to just have that comfort and that somebody there, a small little community there. And as far as helping people like that, I think that's a good example. And it would be really nice to see more things like that in even stuff as like little as, like if you can Uber drive and things like that, or like delivering with like DoorDash and stuff like that. You never really know who you're helping in that. And in those situations where we did have to like call for like a delivery or whatever, we were super thankful that there were people who were able to do that. and bring us what we needed when we didn't realize it was something that we would need. So
Something you said kind of reminded me about specifically the thing you were saying about unfamiliar city, blah blah blah, all that. Because I think it was mentioned in the documentary. There's like less than a dozen, I want to say, plastic surgeons who do transgender operations in America, which kind of just leads me to the point of, if you want to go beyond like helping your buddy Steve with his, I don't know, top surgery, like, I don't know. There's more to do, is what I'm trying to say. That beyond like an individual scale, that like just things need to improve to truly like help like a lot of people or help people a lot. There need to be changes in like a societal, like community-wide sense. Also, I guess donating to like transition funds is also pretty cool. Mostly that first thing though that I said.
I think there's a lot more doctors than we give credit for. I think that the doctors, so surgeons don't know how to damn market themselves. Let's be honest. They are surgeons. They are not marketers. The thing that frustrated, so I went to Plano, and the institute I went to, actually, vaginoplasty was not listed on the website. The only reason I knew about it was I knew through other people in the community who had been to this doctor, and I had been to the same doctor for an orchie. But in terms of his online presence, in terms of being able for him to give me other people to talk to, that was non-existent. And since then, I know there are other doctors in Houston and Austin that just do not get the airplay, if you would, in terms of recognition that, yeah, they do surgeries. They may do only certain surgeries, but they do some surgeries. For my surgery, I wanted to say two things. One, I have to agree that our cis allies are amazing. I had a cis ally that was really an acquaintance that drove me to Plano, stayed with me at a friend's house in Plano, and drove me back home. And there, honestly, I was considering a bus before that, because there was no way I could have possibly done any of that myself. And then post-surgery, I'm gonna be honest, new vagina, don't know a damn thing, doesn't come with an operating manual. If it were not for Facebook and other trans women and even other cis women, there were a lot of things that scared the shit out of me, that it took other people saying, it's okay, that's normal. This is what you do. This is how you handle this sort of thing. Or that's part of surgery, and the stuff that happens after surgery, it'll get better, I promise. So there is a lot that can be done there to be that support group that everyone is talking about. Even if you don't know diddly squat about the surgery, to be able to listen and to try to be an encouraging voice is very helpful.
Yeah, I think to speak on that, because you make a fantastic point, and also to speak on what Sam was talking about, just about the emotional support aspect. Tying back to the documentary, I know one of the patients was talking with the doctor whether or not he would be willing to talk to her mother after the surgery, just to give sort of an explanation and be there as like a person of support after having to show her mother about like what happened with the surgery and what the surgery was for. And I think one of the most powerful things that cis allies can do is just be like hype people, because it's so, there's a period, at least from what I understand, because I've never had surgery, so this is something that I can't personally speak on, but from what I understand from people who have had transitional surgeries, is that there's a period of dysphoria that can happen after the surgery, especially because like the surgery can come with a lot of pain afterwards. And again, there is sort of like a lack of resources about what type of aftercare that is needed, and things like that. So there's sort of this like, there's this period where some people who receive these surgeries may feel some sort of regret, or some sort of like pain coming from the surgery. And I think that cis allies, like being there and being so proud of trans people for getting those surgeries, and so happy for trans people getting those surgeries, is just like a positive affirmation, not only about like that the surgery was in fact for them and was in fact part of their transition and a positive thing, but also like something that is an emotional support through the pain of the aftercare. And it's also like trans surgeries and going to doctors with these surgeries, again, because like each doctor has a different method for the surgery. And I know we brought up the quality of the quality control of surgeries as well. Getting surgery as a trans person as part of a transition can be an incredibly scary process. And I think trying to, even before the surgery happens, like trying to be an emotional support pillar, and trying to like hype people up and being like, this is something that you can do, this is something that you should do, because this is something that you've wanted for a very long time, I think can be just like a huge force of reassurance, both before and after the surgery.
So I think, and the documentary would have focused on it too, we're focusing a lot on surgery as, you know, a means to transition. Are there any things you'd like to highlight for the audience about transitions that maybe aren't covered in pop culture or are surgery, that aren't surgery related?
Sorry to always be the first one who starts talking. It's a personal problem that I have. But like, yeah, definitely there are a lot of people who never get surgery, never get what's the other thing? Never get hormones, never do anything like that. And frankly, I could not do that. That big respect. I absolutely respect that. And I can't imagine how like difficult that must be. But then again, for a lot of them, that isn't difficult because that's how they want to live their lives. Anyway, lost track of my topic. Yes, there are a lot of people out there who don't get surgery, and there are a lot of people out there who don't even get hormones. And mostly those people don't get represented in culture. It's, you know, everyone asks, oh, are you going to get the surgery? Neglecting the fact that there's like 50 various surgeries, each of which is done by like 3 doctors, all of whom live in like Indonesia or something. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but anyway.
Well, I think I was thinking more about other aspects of transitioning. Like,
oh man, I'm so sorry.
No, you're great. But yeah, the sort of the other aspects of transitioning, folks.
Frankie, are you talking about things like the legal transition, things like that?
Yeah, legal transition, definitely.
Okay. I guess I wanted to drop the point that, you know, every transition is different. Every transition is unique, and there are 1,001 ways to do this. Honestly, for a lot of people, that first step is a legal transition. Not everyone goes through even that, but it is a process that can be difficult, frustrating, and hard, and at the same time make life sometimes easier on the other side of it, which is why it's so recommended. So before Pride Community Center, I was involved with Transgender Education Network of Texas, and we had cases where parents were trying to get help for their kids, but their kids had not had legal transition, and that not having that legal transition hindered them so much. And we didn't want to tell them, you know, I didn't want to tell them, well, you have to, you know, you have to go get a name change in order to get what you need. But we live in a world in which the reality is you do. And skating that was not a comfortable thing for me as someone trying to help someone out, and it definitely wasn't something that was easy for the parent or child.
What is a legal transition, Katie? Can you give us a little bit more detail on what that is?
I'm glad you asked. So that would be a legal name change, if that's what you want, to something that matches more how you identify. And we could get into, finding the right name is a whole drama set in and of itself, but that's another conversation. The other thing is having the gender marker on your passport, your driver's license, all your sort of legal documents changed to the gender that you are. Also, what we're leaving out of this discussion is that we keep talking about this like crossing the gender divide, right? Male to female or female to male, instead of people that may not want to do that, that are gender queer, that are non-binary, that our legal systems do not. Jesse, I see you have something to say on that, so I'm going to shut up and.
No, I was just very, very happy that you brought up that point. And if you have more to say, you can definitely continue, but that was excellent that you brought up that point. And I think that the hardest part about transitioning and transitional resources is that so many people from an outside perspective believe that it is black and white. And the transitioning process for everyone, whether they prefer to transition from one gender binary to another, or if they prefer to identify as non-binary or genderqueer, is just completely fluid. It is completely up to how that person wants to be perceived by other people, how that person wants to present their gender, and what their gender means to them. And gender can constantly be changing throughout someone's lifetime, which is why so many of the transitional resources, such as legal resources and surgical resources, and very, very permanent resources, can be very intimidating, because you can change your gender multiple times throughout your lifetime, and that's completely natural and that's completely normal, but it is treated as if it should be a binary and should be a permanent decision and be like, oh, I'm trans, that's like what I will be for the rest of my life. And it is like, it's constantly moving. And I think that it is an exclusionary process. And a lot of people make it an exclusionary process. And so I think the most important thing to remember about transitioning is that transitioning should always be for you and should always be something that you do because you feel comfortable with it, and not necessarily done because you think it is the process of being trans. And I think that one of the functions of Transcend is to provide educational resources about some of the transitioning resources on campus and in the Bryan College Station area. But like one of the points that we always try to make is like, you don't have to do any of these things if you don't want to. I personally have a very close friend who is transmasculine, but prefers they, them pronouns, and is like choosing specifically to not do HRT, not because they like don't have the resources or don't have access to it, but because it's just something that they don't want to do as part of their transition. And it's like, that's dope. Like, that's so cool. And I like love them for it. And like, they present themselves through makeup and through clothing and through binding. Yes. Thank you, Sam. HRT, for those who do not know, is hormone replacement therapy. Is another way of medically transitioning in which you manipulate the hormone levels in your body to change secondary sex characteristics. But I think it's wonderful when people make those choices specifically for themselves. And then it's even more wonderful when they decide to change those decisions later on. And I think that, I think that's just the biggest point I want to make is like, transitioning is not it is a part of being trans in that it is personal, but it is not a part of being trans in that it is like required.
The other thing I would add to HRT and hormones is that it is some degree age specific too. You know, if you start cross hormone therapy, where you, for instance, for someone going from female to male, you block your estrogen and progesterone, and you take testosterone for male to female, opposite sort of stuff. Those effects are more pronounced the younger and closer to puberty you are, than say if you are in your 50s, 60s, and 70s. And we have people transitioning at those ages because that's just what life has dealt them. And the hormones don't have as much of an effect. And so I bring this up because, you know, media, we always kind of, with media, focus on the amazing effects of hormones and surgeries and stuff like that, and we don't really talk about sometimes our elder community, the effects are not the same.
Okay, all right. Managed to get myself unmuted. We have a question in the Q&A. What does it mean to be trans? Which I don't actually have an answer for that besides something like pretty flippant. So I'm just going to pass it to Jesse, who looks like they want to say something.
No, thank you for that. And thank you for checking the Q&A, because I'm kind of dumb and I didn't realize that that was a thing. But the definition of being trans is very personal to many different people, but the definition that is generally agreed on within the community is that it is when you are trans, you are a person who is transitioning from the gender that you were assigned at birth to a different gender. And this is incredibly inclusive of non-binary and genderqueer people. I really want to stress that, because transitioning from a binary birth gender to a non-binary gender, or perhaps having no gender at all, or any sort of genderqueer identity, is, again, transitioning to another gender. So it is really just breaking the gender binary by deciding that, or recognizing that you were not the gender that you were assigned at birth. And if anyone has anything to add on to this, then you can go ahead and speak, because again, being trans.
So I'll give the flippant response. What does it feel like to be cisgender? You don't know, because cisgender is a privileged state, right? You don't have to think about it. But that in itself is something we should question and think about. We ask the question, what does it feel like to be trans? But let's think about the question, what is it like to be cis? What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? Transgender people deal with those questions all the damn time. It's about time our cisgender friends did too.
That is a really good point. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I have no thought.
I'll go and then you go. But yeah, no, I think you bring up a fantastic point, Katie, I'm sorry. But yeah, I think it's very important to remember that so much of gender and so much of sexuality is defined by identities and labels, when it is too fluid of a process and too fluid of recognizing a very personal experience to really be put into those boxes. And so again, those labels of transgender or cisgender, or branching out into the LGBT community of homosexual or heterosexual, these are all words that were created specifically originally to divide people into marginalized groups, and to divide people into labels and boxes to be easily recognized by people with privilege as a separation between people with privilege and people without that privilege. And unfortunately, while these labels have roots in division, and while these labels have roots in separation and marginalization, I think that creating new labels like non-binary and genderqueer, and more micro labels as well, is just furthering vocabulary, not necessarily to create labels and to create subgroups, but to create a dialogue on that personal experience of how you feel gender and how you feel presentation and how you feel attraction to other people. And I think, again, like, I love the point that Katie brought up, is like asking about the trans experience, like asking like what being trans is, varies so much between person to person, because like trans is just a word that is a very general term that is used to describe so many different experiences. And so like a more appropriate question is like, how do you experience gender? Like, how do you experience like being born as a certain gender and like having to transition in a society where transitioning is not necessarily something that is like admired. And I think it's, yes, like understanding that it is so important to understand that being trans and having any sort of experience with gender is very, very personal. And so like categorizing all trans people as like being trans is not necessarily as inclusive as we would hope it would be within our society. And while trans representation and asking those questions is very, very important, it's also important to remember that like while being trans as being part of the trans community is still a community of many, many different people with many different experiences.
Thank you all. We have another question in the Q&A. So how would you go about correcting someone who consistently misgenders in a polite way, especially to a family member who doesn't understand non-binary trans?
Slap them upside the head.
Okay.
Attack them physically.
I am joking.
Do not attack them physically.
That's a hard one, isn't it? Because you're dealing with family who you love and respect, and you may know that their intent is not necessarily meant to be bad or hurtful, but it is. I think it's a complex question. I think you have to realize some people mean it in a mean way, and some people just, it is a hard thing for them. You know, you grow up with someone and you call them, I'll use myself, 30 years, I was called David. You know, my mom and my father were going to have a problem with that when I changed it to Katrina, and now they had to start using female pronouns. My mom struggles with it today, and it drives me literally nuts. But part of it is that understanding of where they're at and what they're trying to do, and still sticking up for yourself and gently reminding them, this is who I am, this is what this is what I need to be called, this is what makes me feel whole and safe. And I know everyone else has better responses than my slap your person upside the head answer.
No, I would agree with part of that. It's definitely, there comes to a point of being polite, and then being civil and understand and respecting the person that you're talking to while also respecting yourself. But I think touching on something that you had mentioned about remembering where they are in this journey of, if you consider someone who is trans, or if you are trans, you've come to that conclusion and you've admitted to yourself and like accepted that to it in yourself, about yourself, and you have started the process of learning about, okay, where am I on this wonderful spectrum? Where am I in this? And who do I see myself being in the future? And how do I get there? And you are chapters and chapters and chapters, in theory, ahead of family, relatives, old friends from like high school, things like that. And they're on page 1, you know, when you bring this kind of stuff up, especially in the South, in conservative areas, in communities that don't necessarily value gender diversity or have open conversations about this type of diversity, you know, this community. And it's important to remember that they have some catching up to do. You know, there will be, you know, moments of grief hearing the things that they're saying and hearing them, you know, not accurately represent you and call you something different or call you something that you don't feel comfortable with anymore. And there's definitely that grief, but there has to be a balance between giving them grace to catch up to where you are, but also respecting yourself and allowing yourself to take up space and to remind them that you deserve to be respected too. And like patience, like balancing that, I think is really important to remember. As far as gentle correcting, you know, just taking them to a side, talking one-on-one if you can, you know, trying to let them know how it makes you feel. As a petty, unfortunate thing that I did as when I was dealing with my parents, like trying to understand my name and things like that. Neither of my parents like their middle names. So in my phone, I just named them their middle names. And, you know, whenever they would text me or call me, it just was a reminder. And it was just something that they didn't like to be called, that just like kind of gave me a little bit of, you know, satisfaction. Definitely not something I would recommend, but it did help me feel better a little bit. So.
I would echo what Katie and Sam said about like being polite and other stuff. And I would add like that you just have to be confident in yourself. Having some fundamentalist Baptist relatives who refer to my uncle's husband of a long time as his special friend. You know, gender identity was just something that was never going to be able to be bridged with them. They were always going to see me one way. And so it just, you know, I had to know in myself, you know, be confident and just ignore it. And also having, you know, cousins who don't necessarily, you know, agree with my aunt and uncle. There's also like, I think, support in that. So like having people roll their eyes at them was really comforting, but they were just never gonna get on board. So not stressing too much. And so we have one last question that I wanted to ask.
Sorry, could I add something to that last question? On my bad.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, also we did get a question in the chat from Connor White. So I would like to address that question in a second as well. But in terms of correcting people about your pronouns, it is so hard to do this, especially if you are non-binary. And I want to apologize for your experience, because it's like, there's like levels of the LGBT community that have become, there's like levels of acceptance, and like the liberal side of politics has slowly started to grasp the idea of being gay, and they're like, okay, we're comfortable with that now. Like being trans, they aren't there yet. Being non-binary, that doesn't exist to them yet. And so I'm very sorry that you have to go through this experience, because like trying to explain like gender non-binary truly is a representation of the fluidity and the personal experience of gender. And that's so hard to explain to people. But I think that recognizing that being non-binary is a personal experience, but also a form of activism, is something that is very important in correcting people, because it's really all up to your level of comfort and what you want to do. Because there is absolutely nothing wrong with being non-binary and saying, I'm going to be non-binary and just exist as me. And like, if people don't want to deal with that, then like, that's fine. And I won't interact with those people. And that's like, if you want to stay within like your community and just feel comfortable, like as a non-binary person, like go for it. Like that is your right, like as a human being. But it's also like you have the outlet to do activism as a non-binary person and to make change within your community as a non-binary person, to talk about your personal experience and try to explain like what you know about gender communities and like the trans community to the people that are misgendering you. And so it like, in terms of correcting people, it's kind of like approaching it like a conversation, and approaching it from an activism standpoint is kind of important, because you have to recognize whether or not people are coming from bad faith, and whether or not they want to misgender you simply because they don't like the idea of being non-binary and they just like are doing it to be mean, or if they're coming from a place of a lack of education, and so you have the outlet to educate them on like your views and your perspective. And that was a lot of words to just say, like, it is like, in terms of correcting people, like, you can do whatever you feel comfortable with because you have absolutely no responsibility to correct people. But if that is something that you want to do, and if that is something that you want to further education on your community and your experience, then like you have that outlet.
So we had a question in the chat. I may be paraphrasing slightly, but what is the point of a gender identity? And I wanted to touch on that a little bit because I know that Jesse's going to have so many fucking words. Again, pardon my French. I literally can't not curse. So many words on that. So I wanted to say something as someone who doesn't have quite so many thoughts on it first. But so for a lot of trans people, the purpose of a gender identity is to stop wanting to kill themselves. Which is really important in my opinion, as someone who does not like wanting to kill themselves. So a lot of it is just, I want to stop feeling like an alien in my own body, blah, 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 blah. But then for other people, it's also something a little bit more. It's like, that's when you start getting from gender to gender identity, in my opinion, is when you start crossing into like, just this like conversation with yourself and this self-analysis, trying to figure out how you feel like you want to interact with the world, I guess. I am sort of running out of ways to say this, but
I guess I don't understand the question a little bit, to be honest. Gender identity is a component of identity, just like gender expression is, just like so many other things are. It just is. I know we're going to have discussion on the politics and the activism associated with it, but honestly, if we as a society would just see it as it's one other thing about us, and it's one other thing that is unprovable. Just like you can't prove to someone else what the faith is that you hold in your heart, or how you think, or so many things that are internal, the same with things like gender identity. It is something I know in myself, but there's no way I can prove it to you. There is no scientific measurement I can make that will prove to you I am who I say I am. You have to trust me to be honest and tell you who I am.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that for cis people, we just give them that. You know, that's a given. That's it's just something that is inherent with them. And if only that was something that could be inherent with trans people, to just say, like, no, I am, like, me personally, like, I am male. Like, why do we have to go through 1,000,001 questions to understand that? Why can it not just be when a cis woman says, no, I am a woman? Why are we backpedaling like, oh, I'm so sorry? Like, it, for example, if we're on the phone with someone and, you know, the phone automatically distorts, you know, obviously voices and things like that. And you say like, okay, thank you, sir, like whatever. And they're like, oh no, I'm a woman, you know, oh, I'm so sorry, you know, that kind of situation. Why can it not just be the same with trans people when addressing them and understanding who they are? Why can it not just be the same? But going back a little bit on that, the purpose of like a gender identity is, like Katie was saying, just a facet of identity, but it's something that we all have, you know, whether it's a lack of or a strong, you know, a strong feeling towards. Everyone has them, regardless of if they're cis or trans. People who fall and like find themselves going into and adhering to gender stereotypes and things like that very strongly, of, you know, like a breadwinner situation, or you know, a very like motherly role, things like that. They have, and they identify very strongly with their gender in that way. That's a gender identity, you know. And then trans people have the same, it's just different than what we were assigned, if that makes sense. Just as a quick, like, the way that I see it.
Yes, it was so funny. I didn't know if you noticed, Sam, but like you were talking and I was like, period. Because that was like so good. Um, but but yes, I think and I'm gonna try to keep this short because I talk so much and I feel so strongly about this. But I think it is very important to, in terms of recognizing gender and gender identity in society, it is very important to know the difference between gender and gender identity, because so many people, so many cis people, when they are talking about trans people, will be like, this is Jesse, he identifies as a man, as opposed to this is Jesse, he is a man. And that is, it's very different, because like categorizing gender as an identity makes it your entire identity. And so when I tell people that I am a trans person, they immediately think like, he's trans. That's like all he's about. He wears only pink, blue, and white on everything, and that's his whole personality. And so I think it's very, very important to recognize that, like, the purpose of gender identity in society is that it is a function of the society that trans people were born into. We identify as different genders because we have to, because gender is an identity in our society, because our society has broken people up into man and women, and whether you are a man, you are expected to act masculine, and whether you are a woman, you are expected to act feminine. And so gender has become an identity as a function of our Western society, but so we have to identify as a certain gender in order to be perceived, to have our gender perceived as a specific way within our society. So that's like, gender identity is a function and a result of the society we were born into. Gender presentation, gender as we explain it and as we experience it, is just part of the natural human process. And so in order to, as trans people, because we experience gender differently than cisgender people, we have to rely on gender identities in order to make cis people and make people born within the society and have these societal expectations understand our gender experience, if that makes any sense. And so, yeah, gender identity is essentially like a vehicle to explain our gender experience, because we experience gender differently than society expects us to.
Awesome, thank you. I think all really great points. So we are going to wrap up. I wanted to give the panelists each a second if they had any final concluding thoughts, and then the center will conclude.
Okay. For my final thoughts, I don't have any thoughts, so I'm just going to go through the questions that we still have, like, super quick. This future panel would be cool. Blah, blah. What do you think cis people don't ask themselves that trans people do? I wish that cis people would ask themselves, why am I this gender? And do I want to be? Which, 95% of them are still going to say, yeah, okay, this is fine. I like this. There's still, it's a little bit different, your relationship to your gender, once you've looked at it and analyzed it instead of just accepting it. And Michaela, I wish that I had known that it was even possible to be a gender besides the one I was born with. Because for a long time, I super didn't, until I followed some weird people who did a lot of art on Twitter. And now my name's Myra. And okay, someone else start talking.
Final thoughts, Katie?
Well, I had one, but then it escaped my mind. I
We
think
all
what I was
been
going
there.
to, I think what I was going to talk about is, and I do not. So, sometimes I come across flippantly uh, in a way that, like to hit someone upside the head that may seem violent or over the top. But what I'm about to say, I want to urge gentleness with yourself. There is a lot of privilege tied up in cis and trans, specifically cisgender privilege. So there are a number of questions that, because a cisgender person has not lived in contrary view, or as a transgender or non-binary person has had to, they have not experienced the friction that occurs. So there are questions that are asked of transgender people that would never be asked of cisgender people. As going as far as to, I've heard things like, well, why do trans women always have to dress up so femininely? You would never ask a regular cis woman that. But because it's a trans woman, somehow there is license to ask that sort of question. And so I think we need to all go through a process where we check ourselves and check our assumptions. And I mean that in the gentlest way. I am not trying to berate anyone, but it is something we need to do in order to come together better as a community. Thank you.
Thank you. Sam, final thoughts?
I don't really have a ton of final thoughts, and my dog's starting to get a little antsy, so I'm just going to stay muted just in case he barks.
For sure. Jesse?
Yeah, I think my final thought is that I'm just like so excited that everyone is here. I was checking like the attendees number at the top of the Zoom screen, but like, oh my goodness. Because like it's like the most important thing is that y'all are participating in these events. Y'all are coming to hear trans voices and trans experiences, and y'all are participating in the conversation that is gender, because gender is a conversation. And I think that I'm just very excited that y'all are listening to trans voices. And I would like to build off of what Katie said in that, yes, thank you, Brian. But I want to build off of what Katie said in that recognizing privilege is something that also applies within the transgender community as well. Because like as a trans man, I will never experience things that trans women will. And trans women like statistically experience a lot more violence and a lot more discrimination and ostracization than trans men do. And so like recognizing my privilege and recognizing your privilege as a cisgender person or as an ally is so important, in having that conversation, because it recognizes that some voices need to be prioritized over others because some voices are not heard within our society. And so just you guys coming here to listen to our voices and you guys coming here to be educated and just, again, having this conversation and being open to this conversation is the most important thing. And I am so, so proud of y'all, seriously.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you to all of our panelists. I know this wasn't necessarily the event that we had all planned, but I think we had some really great conversation and talking points and talking about the trans experience and stuff like that. The center will be putting on a variety of events throughout the semester virtually, and our Pride History Month calendar will be coming out in October. So if you enjoyed what you saw here, I know that the Pride Community Center will be having several events. I'm sure Transcend will also be participating in History Month. So please check out our social medias and other places like that to stay up to date. And with that, thank you, and y'all have a good evening.